The body has 3 lines of defense in its infection control system. Firstly, to stop pathogens from entering the body, but then of course if they do, to combat them and battle the pathogens. So firstly, let's do the first line of defense. Now the first line is physical and chemical barriers, literal barriers to stop the pathogens from entering. So our physical barriers, as you can probably imagine, is the skin, but it's also on the inside surfaces of our body, inside our nose, behind our eyes, in our mouth, in our ureter, in our lungs. All of those places are actually lined with something not skin, but another membrane called a mucosal membrane. So the mucosal membrane is on the inside surfaces of the body. It's a physical barrier. Now, we also have chemical barriers. Things like saliva, stomach acid, tears, earwax, and mucus. So mucus is made by mucosal membranes. Mucus is made in the respiratory tract and various other places, and it's a thick, gooey sort of substance that traps pathogens in its stickiness. And then we have this process of that mucus being taken up through our trachea and our other airways by the cilia, and we then clear it out of our body through coughing and swallowing or spitting out. So we've got our first line of defense is our physical and chemical barriers that stop the pathogen from entering the body. If the pathogen does actually get into the body, well, we have our second line of defense. Now the second line of defense has a number of different parts. The first one is fever, and it's an important part of the immune response because it promotes the production of white blood cells, and it makes the environment hard for the pathogen to live in. So it promotes white blood cells. Now, white blood cells are super important as part of our immune response, as I'm going to explain soon. So the first one is fever, increased temperature. The second one is inflammation. Now, inflammation doesn't just happen in response to a pathogen. You know, you sprain your ankle or you bang your knee and you get inflammation. But inflammation also occurs if there's a foreign body. Now, so inflammation is a number of different steps. First one, it's swelling. And then associated with that swelling, you get pain, redness, and heat. So, essentially what's happening with inflammation is that the capillaries, the area where the foreign body has entered or wherever the trauma is, the capillaries around that area dilate and become leaky to allow white blood cells to exit or to go out of the capillaries to the area of the injury. And so the reason we get the swelling is because we get increased flow of blood to the area. The capillaries open up, they become leaky, so we get more blood to the area, and that's why it feels sore, and that's why it looks red, because we've got more blood, and that's why it feels hot. So all of this process, inflammation, it's all about allowing more white blood cells to the area. So, what's all this about white blood cells? Well, the second line of defense has a third part, and this is called phagocytosis. Phago means to eat, and cyte is cells. So what we're talking about here is cell eating. And you know what does cell eating? White blood cells. Particular types of white blood cells called macrophages. Macro meaning large, and phage meaning a cell that eats. So large white blood cells come into the area via the inflammatory response, and the idea is that they eat the pathogens, they also eat the dead white blood cells, and they eat the dead body cells to kind of clean up the area. So the whole point of the second line of defense is what we call non-specific immune response. It's non-specific because it doesn't target any particular pathogen. It's just focused on and to attack the foreign agent and try and contain it as best it can. It's non-specific because it'll take out anything that's foreign and clean up anything that's dead. It's not specific at all. The specific immune system is the third line of defense, and I'm going to clean some space and talk to you about that. So our third line of defense is our specific immune response. So what I mean by specific is that it's specific to a particular type of pathogen. Now this process takes a bit longer to get started. First of all, it's got to recognize the type of pathogen, and then it needs to make specific things to fight this pathogen. So the specific things that it uses to fight the pathogen are called antibodies. Now you may well have heard of antibodies before. Antibodies are proteins that are made by the body, by particular white blood cells, to target specific pathogens. So they're specific to a particular pathogen. So how does a body know what antibodies to make? Well, on our invaders, here's our little invader. Now all of our pathogens have little markers on them, little markers that are specific for this particular pathogen. Now those markers are called antigens. We call them antigens because they're antibody generators. So our body detects these things and sees, have I seen this before? If I've seen it before, I've already got white blood cells, memory cells that have seen it before, who know how to make those antibodies, and they can start producing the antibodies. And these antibodies, proteins, come along and hook onto our pathogen. They make them clump together and they start to break them down. So the antibodies, they kind of look like this, and they kind of dock onto their antigens like this, and they slow down the pathogen so it can't move around as much, makes them clump together and starts to break them down. Now, if the body hasn't seen this particular pathogen before, it needs to work out how to make those antibodies. That's why it's a little bit slower before it can actually start making the antibodies. And then it starts to make them, produce the antibodies, and then we have this specific immune response. Alright, so the third line of defense is called the specific immune response, and it involves the production of antibodies that are very, very specific to target a particular pathogen. And so we've got 3 lines of defense. There's a lot more I can tell you about the third line of defense. We have got T cells and we've got B cells, and I'm going to give you more information about that in another video, but I think that's enough for now.